Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Kristoff, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Now, I'm coming at you from Treaty 6 territory in what is known as Canada. That is the traditional home of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux peoples. So, I started Your Forest out of an excitement to learn more about my craft and try and become the best version of my professional self that I could be. And with that, I wanted to share that journey with anybody that wanted to listen. And realistically, it was just an excuse for me to learn, but fortunately, you all get to benefit as well. Throughout that time, we explored so many topics, 167 to be exact, not including this episode. We introduced the idea of public forests and the implications of that. We talked about the myriad of wildfire mitigation, resilience, and societal issues, a bunch of episodes on that. We talked about spirituality, aesthetic, biodiversity, sustainability, changing forest management. We talked about cultural challenges. We talked about Indigenous rights and freedoms, carbon balance, climate change, herbicide, reforestation, education, decolonization, all kinds of amazing topics that just covered the entire breadth of sustainable forest management ideas. It's been a heck of a journey. Throughout all of this, I've realized a vision of forest relationship and stewardship that I think is a lot more comprehensive and representative of societal values and scientific realities than I previously had. Hopefully you've learned something, or at least hopefully I've been able to pique your interest and curiosity and help you see a new perspective somehow. Now, this is the last one, people. This is it. That's all she wrote. I'm pumped. I have a doozy for you guys. So, over the last 9 years, nearly a decade of podcasting, I've learned a lot of things. I've grown a lot, changed as a person, as a professional, and it's all thanks to the incredible people that I've had on this show. All the guests have been incredible. They've been amazing. To narrow it down to 6 episodes, 6 little clips that I could share with you that I felt summarized what I've learned from this podcast, what I feel was the biggest take-homes, was so challenging to do. But we did it. And the episode we got today, I hope it's as good as I think it is. We'll put it that way. So, first of all, at the end of this episode, I'm going to do my big old thank you to every single person that has helped me throughout this endeavor. For right now, I want to thank Wes Fraser and Greenlink Forestry for all of their support over all of these years. Specifically, I want to thank Richard Briand and Derek Fisher for their unwavering support and dedication to my creative process and their unwavering dedication to freedom of ideas. So thank you to both of you. There's no way I ever could have done this without you, so thank you. And also to all of you, all the listeners. Without you, I would just be some dude spouting egotistically into the void. There would be no ripples of impact. There would be no change. So without you, this is all pointless. So thank you for listening. I really do appreciate you. Okay. The first clip I have for you today is one of the most powerful and one of the most commented on that I've ever done. And it's also one of the first. Episode 34. It is called Canada, a Treaty Story with Dr. Matthew Wildcat. Now, Matthew is a member of Ermineskin Cree Nation. He is an assistant professor and director of Indigenous governance in the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta. So Matthew is here to help us start in a good way. He's here to help us understand the history of this place we call Canada and the treaties that made it possible. Matt's going to help us explore the idea of Canada and the foundations it was built on. We're going to reflect on whether or not we have lived justly in this place and what kind of history we want to be told about it. Is Canada going to be a story of reconciliation, respect, reciprocity, coming together? Or is it going to be the other option? A story of conquest, a story of greed, and of racism. I don't think any of us want that. So the other option's treaties. That's what we got to go with. And we need to understand those treaties, what they mean. We need to recognize those sovereign agreements that made Canada possible and honor them. We need to embrace them and remember that we are all treaty people.
For me, I think growing up on reserve was super valuable because you pick up so much information, but also you live in a context that is like, constantly politicized, I would say, in a way. So people are always talking about politics. For me, those conversations were just like, ever present, ubiquitous, right? And obviously when you talk about First Nations politics, your relationship with Canadian society is ever present, right? So when you're Indigenous, you have no choice but to be well-versed in what Canadian society is and how it impacts you. When you're non-Indigenous, you can often ignore Indigenous peoples. You don't have to have a good sense of who they are,
right,
what your relationship with them is. Obviously we come into conflict like Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. But, these things I think are always kind of bubbling under the surface, but then sometimes they erupt. We can probably actually characterize a lot of relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in this country as, there's always these kind of like tensions that exist. And then sometimes they erupt into these spectacular events. And then when the spectacular events happen, we want to think like, this seems ridiculous. Like, where did this all come from? But it's just like sometimes it boils over, right?
Yeah.
Well, and part of the, the power balance between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people's country is that, for Indigenous peoples, when we have to negotiate and talk through issues of conflict and, we're often forced to do so on the terms set out by non-Indigenous people, right? And, what I mean by that is, we have to do it on the basis of Canadian law. We have to do it on the basis of, kind of like very entrenched, and these ideas are typically so entrenched that they're taken for granted, right?
Yeah.
But ideas of like, what is the individual and like individual rights, equality before the law, rule of law, these are all terms that we hear getting tossed around when we try to work through these difficult concepts, right? Or these difficult conflicts that people have.
Yeah.
But what people don't understand is when we are forced to use those terms, we're using terms that are already kind of like tilted in favor of non-Indigenous peoples in terms of how we figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
And so, a concept like treaty, I think is probably one of our most important. Is probably really something that should be a touchstone for more people in Canadian society, because at least at some respects, what it does is it tilts our understandings back towards Indigenous people's own understandings of concepts like justice, law, fairness. And so that's why I think it's such an interesting concept, actually.
Totally. Well, that's why we're all here today, right? Like the whole concept of treaties and like, what the hell is a treaty really? Like I'm sure you have a very good understanding of it, right?
Yeah.
But I think, and I imagine most Indigenous folks understand the full history of the context and the treaties and all that. But like, I can honestly say that I grew up in Northern Alberta, right? Amongst like, lots of Indigenous folks. And I was able to come through that without really knowing anything about treaties, right? Besides like the stuff, they're exempt from taxes and they get all kinds of money from the government and this kind of stuff, right? And you're like, I don't even know if any of that's true, right?
Yeah.
At the time, it's just the stereotypes you hear being in a northern town, right? And so I would want to start by talking about exactly like, let's talk about like what a treaty is and try to provide some real factual context for what that is going into this. And then like, so we can try to dissuade some of these stereotypes and some of this misunderstanding. Cause like that's all of this combativeness it's all comes from misunderstanding, right? Like different perspectives because of
I would say mostly ignorance on the part of white folks and stuff like
Yeah,
that, right? Like
yeah.
settler folks, like we don't know. So we need to know in order to have like an actual conversation that's functional.
Yeah, when you're talking, it actually reminds me of an interview I did with Roger Epp last year for one of my classes. And when he talks about treaty, one of the things he says is a lot of times non-Indigenous people think treaty is just like benefits that Indigenous people get, right?
That's right.
And it's not an understanding of treaty as a two-way relationship because, the huge part of treaty is that non-Indigenous people get to live here in Canada, right? Like that's what treaties allow for, is they allow for the creation of Canada. There's a very specific understanding of treaties for amongst Indigenous people who signed the numbered treaties. And so these benefits are seen, I think, from Indigenous peoples, a lot of times these benefits are seen as these should be small prices to pay for the ability to like live in Canada, to benefit from all of the resources. This is the terms of a two-way agreement, right? Or a two-way relationship. So, I think though it's also a difficult concept to understand sometimes because treaties refer to actual historic agreements.
Yeah.
But for Indigenous peoples, the concept of treaty refers to like a broader understanding of relationships. And this broader understanding of relationships, of like how you work out stuff together, is something which is meant to be flexible, right? And it's meant to be worked out in context and in the day-to-day.
Right.
And so a lot of times when Indigenous peoples refer to treaty, it's not just a reference to these historic documents, but a reference to an idea of how people live well together.
Yeah.
Right. And so that living well together is what I tend to think about when I think about treaty.
Right.
Because that's what we have to figure out today. When I talk about like treaties are what like gave birth to Canada.
Yeah.
I think one of the ways in which why that should be important to everyone is because if that's not the story that lies at the root of Canada as a legitimate country, then the other story that we have to tell is one of conquest.
Right.
But really, there wasn't really a lot of conquest in Canada. Like, yes, there was the Riel Rebellion, but that happened after treaties were signed, actually. And it's not really, there was never ever a formal effort on the part of Canada to like achieve its sovereignty through conquest.
Not like the States where it was like,
Yeah, but even in the States, typically, they're what are often referred to as the Indian Wars down there, which, antiquated term, but
we got it still too. Yeah.
Even those typically occur after treaties. So
right, sure.
Even in the States, in the States, there's like over 600 treaties between the United States and Indigenous nations. And usually conflict happens after the treaties. Often the conflict happens because the treaties aren't being fulfilled.
Yes.
Right? And so even in the States, there's little ability to tell a story which is based purely on conquest either. Although they did fight militarily a lot more than happened up here.
Yeah, there was a bit of that going on.
Yeah. A good amount of it, yeah. But, so the tricky part is that if it's not based on treaties, it's not based on conquest, then the story Canada has to tell is this story based on the doctrine of discovery, which is that Canada exists because when Europeans showed up, they automatically gained title to land because
this is ours.
They
Look
were,
at it.
Yes, exactly, right? And this is where and we actually have lots of symbols which show that Europeans showing up and planting a flag, right?
Yeah.
And so that is just like, it's not even trying to hide its racism. It's just explicitly racist. We get this land because we're European, we're white, and
we got it.
We're superior, we're better than other people, right? Like this is like the definition of racism, right?
Sure. For sure.
So this is not the story that I think Canada wants to tell about its foundations or origins either. But unfortunately, without treaties, that's the story Canada has to tell, right? And in fact, in some parts of the country, that's the only story Canada can tell right now. We're actually lucky enough in a place like Alberta to be able to say, we can actually talk about treaties as the foundation of a legitimate society, right?
And most people don't, like, I say most people, most non-Indigenous folks don't see treaties as the foundation or a foundation of Canada, right? They see it as this thing off to the side that like, just don't think about it, don't worry about it. So it's like, and I don't mean that as like being offensive to non-Indigenous folks. I just mean like it's not on our radar for the most part, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that right there is even just like a huge discrepancy in how we view this.
If we don't want to be a society built on settler colonization, but we want to be a society built on a treaty relationship, well, then we have to move ourselves that way, right? And how we do that is going to be really difficult. And so I think to some level, there does have to be some reckoning on the part of non-Indigenous people in this country of, okay, how do we make decisions where Indigenous peoples are going to benefit more, right? And like, there's no magic wand that can be waved. And like, right now, I could give you a 10-point bulletin of what I think needs to happen, but I don't think those things are necessarily helpful. I think the bigger issue is that non-Indigenous peoples need to really take on this idea of being a treaty partner with Indigenous peoples.
Sure.
And decolonization, I talk about it more as being a craft or a practice.
Okay.
And you have to be able to build out your skill set in terms of being somebody who practices decolonization as well as just being committed to it, right? Yeah. It's a craft and you have to work on it. You have to build it out. And then, like all crafts, like as you put your time and your energy into it, you become more comfortable with it and you become more skilled and adept at doing it over time. I think also like a craft, it means that you have to keep working at it.
Oh, for sure. Well, dude, I feel like I've been paying a lot of attention like the last few years of my life where I've started to pay more attention to Indigenous stuff that's going on, right?
Yeah.
And the word decolonization, when I first hear it, I'm like, that rubs me the wrong way. I'm like, what the hell does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, kind of like I get the picture of like pick up your shit and go back to England or whatever, right? And that's not what it means.
You're getting on one of those old timey boats with sails, and you're like, this is bullshit. Like, why can't I take a plane?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's like I think that's the idea that a lot of people get, right? They're like, oh, they're telling us to leave Canada. It's like, no. We're just saying like, hey, can we change the way can we do what we agreed to do?
Mm-hmm.
That's basically all we're saying. We agree what we agreed to do because we haven't been doing that so far.
Reconciliation is the other big word as well. And in fact, reconciliation has much more usage in terms of like a conventional and a mainstream sense. It's, something we hear about often in the present. A lot of that, I think, was because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Right.
And it had, the release of that final report had this gravitational pull on Canadian consciousness that I'm not sure anything else has had that pull like the TRC final report. And I think part of that was people coming to terms and confronting the horrors of residential schools in a lot of ways, and it was just very shocking for people. And I think it allowed people to maybe understand in a different way, connect the situation that Indigenous peoples that we find ourselves in today with the fact that there's, historical reasons that have led to this situation. Right.
Yeah.
And so, reconciliation, I think reconciliation has been useful in the fact that it's opened up a space to talk about stuff, but just when we open up space to talk about something, we could just fill it back in with all our old habits. Right. So reconciliation in and of itself doesn't do anything. It's only a matter of whether or not we use that space that's been opened up, and it can't just be all talk, right?
Yeah.
And so
how do we put this to paper, right?
Yeah.
How do we make this something real?
Yeah, and so we're still waiting to find out what the impact of reconciliation will be as a historical moment, I would say, and to what extent that that space that's opened up will stick around and will then be able to make an impact moving forward. And so change is interesting because it's hard to see it when it's happening, right? It's only easier to spot in retrospect, and so I think it's real easy to believe and to feel that we're this kind of monolith that is incapable of changing, but of course we know that that's not true. Like history is full of changes, right?
Yeah.
And so, at some point we have to believe in ourselves to be able to make those changes. But part of that means that, all of these old habits we have to think about and to approach this issue, we have to reevaluate them and decide what can stay and what has to go. And probably a lot of things are going to have to go. Yeah. And it's, being able to replace that with an understanding of what a treaty relationship is going to look like.
So that is how we begin in a good way. By understanding and respecting treaties, that sets us all up for success. It is the beautiful story that we can tell our grandkids. It's how we can embrace our history and choose to move forward together to begin in a good way. Now, the next clip that I have for you is from episode 153. It is called Learn Contemplative Forestry with Dr. Jason Brown. Now, Jason is a lecturer at Simon Fraser University, and he specializes in this intersection of religion, ethics, and ecology. It's such an interesting idea. I kind of dubbed him a forest theologian in this episode because he just seems like this person that can lead us through understanding and tying together our spiritual and very human intrinsic attachments to forests with the instrumental value and the utility that they provide us. Western society is so good at understanding the utility of something. If I have a tree, what can I make out of it? How much money can I get from it? But recognizing and appreciating the intrinsic value, such as the beauty, the ecological integrity, the ecosystem services, the spiritual connection that you might have with that, it's a lot harder for Western society to get behind. And he talks about this third way of being. Not being caught up in just intrinsic value and not being caught up in just instrumental value, but finding a way to merge those two, to work together, and to understand the total complexity of forests so that we can manage those values effectively and not miss out on anything.
The phrase contemplative forestry is something that I coined as a way of talking about my approach to forests, but also because I have a background in forestry, I also think it has implications for forest management, right? So contemplative ecology has been used more widely, or spiritual ecology.
Okay.
When we're talking about the side of the environmental movement that wants to move us into a space of seeing the world as inherently sacred, as a motivation for protecting the world. So getting into that intrinsic value of the natural world. So there's this kind of ongoing conversation in ecological theology, but also across religions, about the sacredness or the sacramental quality of the natural world. So that's sort of the origin of that. Okay, so we start to see in the spiritual or contemplative ecology movement a binary response, right? So what the industrial world did was objectify forests, and that devastated them or converted them into monoculture plantations. Therefore, what we need to do is to start seeing forests as interconnected webs of life, and restoring them and protecting them and seeing them as sacred, right? So it really, in some ways, I think, strips humans of their role as participants in forest ecosystems and starts to see us as observers or protectors of forests, right? So you get a lot of the preservationist kind of motivations, the old growth protection movements, at least among the European descended activists, often frames old growth as a kind of intrinsically sacred whole, right? Like this sort of Clemensian organism that needs to be protected, the integrity of the old growth forest needs to be protected against the invading humans, right? So what often happens is that in the kind of public discourse, we get these oppositions between instrumental value and intrinsic value. And so we used to think instrumentally, the world used to be an object for exploitation. But now the right way to think is that is the opposite, that everything has intrinsic value, right? And that we need to sort of protect the integrity of an ecosystem that almost always excludes us as participants, right? And sets us up as observers. And so the third way, this sort of emerging third way, would be, I think, championed best by, not always, but in a lot of ways, the approach that Indigenous people take contemporary Indigenous people take to managing forests, that's informed by their traditional teachings, which is embedded in their cultural relationship to place. So it's not instrumental, it's not intrinsic, it's relational. And that brings in intrinsic value, right? The trees have a kind of personhood, a kinship relationship, but we can also use trees, right? There's very few vegan Indigenous peoples, right?
Yeah, right.
So animals and plants have personhood, right? These are, it's not a metaphor. And again, I'm speaking in generalities, but in the kind of West Coast animistic approach to the world, many Coast Salish peoples, for example, have this animistic view. Plants and animals are people. They're not humans, but they're people, right? And you have to have the right relationship with these people in order to not just survive, but also to live in the world ethically.
Yeah.
But that doesn't exclude you from reciprocating the gift of their lives. And so that's a relational approach that I think Western civilization needs to rediscover in our own lineages, right? And there's plenty of cultural history. If you want to go down the Christian route, you can go down that route. If you want to go down the Jewish route, you can go down that route, or the Stoic, or the Epicurean, right, or the pagan, the polytheistic. There's lots of different ways to rediscover that relational approach to trees and forests, as opposed to these very kind of divisive approaches where we're either intrinsic or instrumental.
Right.
Right.
It's a very simple way of seeing it. Yeah.
Yeah. So in recent years, we've seen a lot of folks talking about forest bathing as an approach to forests, right? Where trees and forests are understood as a kind of healing space, right? And what I see that encouraging or kind of perpetuating the sense of that binary division, because it just sort of perpetuates this idea that the forest is either out there for us, or this idea that the forest has such an inherent dignity that the only thing we could possibly do is walk through kind of starry-eyed and breathing deeply.
Right.
So to me, to talk about a contemplative forestry is both to appreciate the deep, mysterious, and sacred wonder that are trees and forests, but also to be able to have some kind of relationship with the forest that's not just either exploitative or aesthetic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I particularly love the concept of reciprocity when it comes to forestry. I think it's an interesting concept because I think everyone can think about how the forest offers us up value and raw goods and whatever you might consider, you know what I mean? We get a lot of things from the forest, but it's not often that we consider what we're giving back, right? And you might argue that we're planting trees to replace the ones that we cut down. You're like, yeah, that seems like you're maintaining, that's definitely a maintenance. You're making sure that you're not actively depleting it, but there's no real thought into how you can give back in what way, and whether or not that's just a
a mentality, a way of considering and thinking about and contemplating the forest, so that when you do active management, you're actively thinking about all those things, or whether or not it's actually an act like many Indigenous people do, which is give a gift, right? Actually giving a gift of whether it be tobacco or something else to the land as that act of reciprocity to kind of set up that relationship actively, and to actually have it's like a miniature ceremony into why this is important, and like I'm aware of this, right? And I love that concept. And I think it's one that, it's fairly new to me. Besides the fact that speaking with Indigenous peoples who have been doing that from time immemorial, but the concept of that and how that plays out in a Western world is fairly new. And I don't know that we know the path.
We don't. Yeah. No, that's my point, right? What we end up doing is either deferring to a general idea of Indigenous reciprocity and saying, yeah, that's a really cool way to do it. But it isn't just that we can appropriate something like offering tobacco to a tree when we cut it down and say, well, now we're doing reciprocity, right? No, that's not, I don't think that that's the path forward for European descended folks, right? To just look at a practice that we don't have any kind of ontological connection to and say, well, we'll just do that and call it reciprocity, right?
Of course, yeah.
Because, the idea of offering tobacco, for example, or offering some sacred substance to a tree before you cut it down is embedded in an animistic religious worldview that a lot of European descended folks don't share, right? So it's a very interesting question. And I think it's really good for you to say, I don't know if we have the right. I don't know. Yeah. We don't know how to do that yet. And that I think is part of contemplative forestry and that's why I think it's aspirational. It's not like a paradigm that I have sorted out. It's not a manifesto, right? It's a question mark it's a question that I'm trying to live out, right? As Rainer Maria Rilke would say, the poet, right? Got to live the questions. And I think how European descended folks like you and I practice reciprocity authentically is one of the questions that we got to keep living for the next few generations before we figure out what it really looks like.
So, where do we go from here? How do we embody intrinsic and instrumental value when we're doing work? It's really hard. So, the next clip maybe can help us figure that one out. So the next clip is from episode 141. It is called The Paradigm Shift with Gary Merkel. Gary is a member of Tahltan First Nations, and he is a professional forester whose work has been instrumental in changing the way British Columbia sees forest management. He was one of the people writing the Old Growth Review in BC and was responsible they interviewed hundreds of people across society to try and gather as much information as possible to make a holistic perspective of forest management and the future values that need to be protected and managed for and stewarded. In Gary's quest to realize a new future for forestry in British Columbia, he discussed a movement of sorts to do just that. He dubbed this a paradigm shift for our collective consciousness in how we imagine forest management. Gary has such a well-rounded understanding, and I'm at a loss to try and think of somebody that might embody this future of forest management better than Gary. So Gary, in this episode, goes into super deep detail about the technical and specifics that we need to do to actually do forest management differently. I did not put that in this episode. So if you want the technical, you got to go listen to this actual episode 141, The Paradigm Shift. For today's clip is more about inspiration, motivation, and understanding how to continue in a good way and include intrinsic and instrumental value in our forest management decisions. He teaches us how to embody this idea of the paradigm shift.
Many years ago, I wrote this piece called What is Sustainability? And I'll just give you the short version of it. Sustainability is not like, it's not an end. It's not a place you go to. It's not the golden cow. It's a discipline. It's a way of being where you just get better and better and better at living in your place and kind of surrendering to the fact that you're infinitely small in a place you know nothing about, and nothing about that will ever change, and just completely living in that space, building your discipline around that. Well, if you accept that, then you say, okay, what about those who aren't like that? Well, you know what? I just can't go poof and all of a sudden you're enlightened.
Right.
Like you have to go through your own journey to grow there. And so my role is not to beat anything into you. My role is to help you come to your own enlightenment and then help you understand how to translate that enlightenment into reality. And so I have two parts of it. And I find it's not too hard to change people's way of thinking. But if they don't have something to fill in the gaps, and they don't have the kind of time that it takes to figure out how do I actually make something to make it work, they will default back to their old behavior. Like, I guess a drinker or smoker or something like that. If they go right back into the old environment with no new supports and no way of doing, they often will just fall back into the old pattern of behavior, right?
Right.
Like addictions are like that, and any other thing that we do as human beings is a lot like that. That's our nature.
Yeah.
The second thing is let's just say that we fail completely as a human species. And we just don't get there, and we basically take the way of the dinosaurs, probably self-caused.
Sure.
Let's just say that happened. Well, how do you deal with that? I don't know, did you ever watch that old Walt Disney show many years ago where it showed all these lemmings running off the cliff?
Oh, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Fascinating, right? Like all these lemmings, they get too many of them and they just start running off the cliff. And then the next thing, the population gets down and the birds kind of get down and everybody can live in balance again for a while till it happens. And then it happens again. And you're just going, wow, that's friggin' fascinating. Well, what if it's us? Until you can see it the same way, you are still in the forest, or you're still in the trees. You're not at the forest. And so it takes a discipline also to step above and look across humans and across animals and across things and say, okay, I see the pattern and I see what's going on, and I'm not here to judge it. I'm just here to, how can I maybe help move this to the next phase of being? That's my role. And so that's how I do it and I don't have, I'm very clear to people. Like I've had a lot of people ask me to come work for them and help them with this. And I said, well, I can come and help you as part of my role, but I'm not going to come and work for you because it's really critical that I remain the person that everybody wants to talk to, because nobody has to work with me.
Right.
They all ask me to do it, and government pays the bill. And so they understand. In fact, they say, you know what? We agree. We support that because we want you to be that. We want you to be that person because we need people like that. For this kind of transition, we need those kind of people. I wish there was more of me right now, but right now there isn't. I think they're out there. And like I said, I'm trying to groom one right now. And I've actually got another one that I think I've groomed. Well, I don't want to say I've groomed. He has groomed himself in his life, and I've kind of been, he's younger. I've been help guide him a lot. He runs a First Nations Forestry Council right now. And he is a real bringing people together and helping them understand and enlighten and grow. And he's just getting better and better at that. And so we're getting more and more people in key positions that are like this. And we talk, and our conversations are fascinating Because we don't just talk about trees. We talk about societal evolution. Okay, and how do we facilitate that? We talk about, we've got this whole group who's stuck in the mud over here. How do we help them enlighten and grow and, be good about what they're doing and really get working on this, and et cetera. It's a lot of that kind of conversation as much as it is about the kind of technical nuts and bolts of how to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
I find that part fascinating.
Oh, wildly so. You got to start calling yourself Gary the Guru.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I usually just characterize it more as Lord takes care of drunkards and fools, and just seems to work for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
I'll tell you the one that gives me the most hope. The component that gives me the most hope. And that is the Indigenous community. And I'll tell you why, is because I've been working a lot with others, and many others are working on supporting that community to understand and start developing its own land stewardship approaches based on its understanding of its connection to nature. Right. So though, and almost all of those approaches, the first thing they do is go back to what's our beliefs. Who are we as a people? And every time that they do that, I have not seen an example of otherwise yet. They go back to their historic, we are part of nature, one small part, and we got to act like that kind of approach. And when they do that, they create very different and unique and incredibly brilliant and practical land management approaches, land stewardship approaches. And the more of them that do that, the less able we are to resist going down that path with them, because they're part of co-governing. And and you say, well, you can't do that. And they go, no, bullshit. Look I'm doing it right here. My buddy's doing it over here. My other one's doing it over here. You can do it. Yeah. So that's what I think is really going to help us a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's people out there that know what's right. You know what's going to work, and you know what's right. And don't worry about so much about the specifics about it. If you can do it, just do the thing, because it takes the people of action to make these changes, to give other people the courage to stand up and do the same thing, right? And yeah, I think you're right. I think it just let's just do it. Let's just do it. What are we waiting for?
When you're building a movement, it's a delicate balance, I tell you.
I bet.
It's always, you're always moving fast enough that people, and keeping people connected enough and seeing enough that they feel a sense of momentum, but not too fast where you start to marginalize and isolate and anger too many at the same time. Like we characterize it that we're moving at the speed of understanding and trust.
That's a beautiful sentiment, and I think it paints an excellent picture in people's minds of what this change is going to require, right? What's it going to take to make sure that these things work out? Yeah, I love it. And speaking to that, to those people that are listening in that don't have a direct connection to this and have no way, but they have strong opinions and they want to support this. Is there any way that people can? What's the best thing that people can do to help support this movement, as you put it?
First off, well, there's two things, because it all does come down to individuals. Individuals are the ones who are going to make this happen. So for you as an individual, start to learn what you don't know, and learn about how ecosystems work and how other countries, and you can do Google searches and read a ton of really cool, interesting stuff. And you don't even have to pick on the real deep scientific stuff. You just kind of start to make it part of your life and make it a bit of your personal purpose. And I want to know a lot more about this, and I read a lot more about it. And there's just such a ton of wealth of stuff out there. But then once you've started to really learn, I think you want to let your local political people know that this is something that we should be doing, because everybody has a chance to talk to their local government or their local MLA or whatever, their local MP. Is that this is the way we need to do this, or this is a good solid approach, and we believe in this, and just really letting them know that. Because these people, they care. I mean, votes are currency for them, right? And if you're a registered voter telling them this is what you like, and they have 100 or 200 or 300 of them telling you, this is Alice's restaurant happening in real life, basically. Yeah.
You could send the email. They have to. They go through those emails, right?
Oh, Christ! And they pay attention to what people want, and especially people who take the time to tell them.
Yeah.
And you know what? If you need to, and you really feel like you got to organize some people, well, organize a bunch of people to tell them together. And if they keep hearing it, and if you start to be watching and maybe a little more scrutinizing and a little more, we love this, but this part's not working, and tell them why, and start to get that stuff built into it. It does start to work. I don't know if I've said this yet, but I want to be clear that while this style of management it does have a lot of science in it, there's no question, but it is hugely wisdom based.
Yeah.
If you think about it for a few minutes, it's absolutely about how do I live with the land and how do I blend in and fit within nature's patterns. The Indigenous communities have learned this, or most of them are earth-based communities who have learned to do this. This is a very practical, common sense, paying attention to what the land's doing, what are the animals doing, what's the water doing, and living within that. And yes, there may be some scientific stuff that can help you inform that, but this is not a numbers stats thing anymore. And so when I talk to people about it, they say, well, how do we talk to people about this? I say, go talk to them about what do they know about the land and what do they see, particularly Indigenous communities and the ones who've lived on it for a long time, who still are land people. They'll tell you stuff that you go, holy crap, I never knew that. And then you start to know your land way better. And so that is the process, and the kind of whole paradigm shift that I was speaking to. A paradigm shift is simply a significant change in thought. That's all it is. It's not action. Action comes because you made a paradigm shift and you have chosen to restructure the way you do things to accommodate that. Now, sometimes a paradigm shift is forced on you, like COVID.
Right.
COVID changed the way we thought about the planet and about disease and about how we structure our communities and economy. And so we translated that into action very, very quickly and started redesigning communities and the way we do meetings and the way we do everything to accommodate that whole new way of thinking about staying not so close to each other anymore and building space for us to be full human beings with space.
Yeah.
So this is the same kind of thing as you as an individual. This paradigm shift is, it takes time. It's not something it's a bit like, it sounds a bit dreamy or idealistic or rose, whatever. Like it sounds, sounds good. That doesn't mean you've made the shift. That just means you got a good idea about it. Now I got to learn a whole bunch of stuff so I can move my mind over there, and then I can start to think about, and what can I do?
It's like changing your cultural perspective, right?
It is.
It's like it's the hardest thing you'll ever try to do is try to change the way your brain works around your relationship to something else.
It is definitely hard. Yeah. I say to people sometimes, I say, this is a bit like, I don't know, going into a Buddhist community or a devout Roman Catholic community, one or the other, and saying, okay, to the Buddhists, tomorrow you're all going to be Roman Catholic, and you Roman Catholics, tomorrow you're going to be Buddhist. That's it.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's changing everything. It's changing everything. It's changing who you are, right? But I think to your point about the power of human desire or when COVID came around and we all went, damn, what do? We changed everything. because we were all on board. We're all like, no, we need to, we have to save people, right? And so we changed everything in like the blink of an eye. We changed it all. And it tells you what we can do as human beings when we really put the power and weight of people behind it, right? When everyone comes together, it's incredible how fast something that takes a long time can happen when all of a sudden the stakes are that high.
From there, how do we get into action? What do we need to do? That episode 141 with Gary is a great one if you want those answers. But for today, we're going to focus on something a little bit different. The next clip that I have for you is from episode 95, and it is called Valuing Forests with Milo Mihalovic, Robert Wagner, and Daniel Harrison. Now, only 2 speakers are in this actual clip because, like I said, trying to get this down to a manageable episode length was challenging. But in this episode, you only hear Daniel Harrison at the beginning. Daniel is a professor of wildlife and forest ecology at the University of Maine. And Milo Mihalovic is a forester that has been working in the realm of forest regeneration for a very long time. Now, today's clip is all about collaboration. It's about communication. It's about what do we have to do to make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes out there. How do we make sure that cooperation is happening in real time and that we're not wasting time and resources working against each other?
And I think a real challenge for us working together across disciplines is to try and decide what is a sustainable landscape. Because within that landscape, you can have a triad of activities. You can have areas with no forest harvesting, maybe your high altitude or your unproductive, poorly drained sites, which can be your forest preserves. And then those may be balanced with some areas of intensive forestry, with more intensive silvicultural approaches, and some areas with that fall in the middle with more softer ecological forestry. But as long as you're getting the landscape outcome, I think you can that you're looking for, I think you can sell all of those things to the public. And it's just a matter of us working better together, I think, to define what do we want the forest landscape to look like and what do we want it to produce.
I think Dan brings us to a really important part of success, and that is reaching across the landscape. And I would go a step past Dan on this, and that's, again, based on my Alberta experience where we have other industrial footprints on that same landscape. But the whole idea of looking across the landscape, so lifting our head up, I mean, when we first started talking about this, we were really looking at trees.
Yeah.
And we lifted our head up to the stand. We need to lift our head up again to the landscape. And we need to have a conversation with other managers on that landscape. And, we currently have a project on the go here in Alberta where we have several different industries around a table talking about managing a shared landscape and looking at directly at habitat supply for 17 identified key species on that landscape. And I think that that's another vital part. We can't simply talk to the public. We also have to be in a position where if the public raises their head up from what we're showing them and says, well, this is great, there's a pipeline goes right through the middle of it. What does that mean? That we can answer that.
Right.
And that we've thought about that. Mm-hmm. Because that's the other piece of this. We can do the very best possible job with forestry. And I'll give you an example. I was involved in a cut block that cost about $160,000 to plan and lay out because it was in caribou habitat. And we laid out this 700-odd hectare cut block with caribou habitat supply in mind, and the vertical retention on the cut block, the block design, everything was built around making it usable by caribou and protecting them from predator access. And, we practically dislocated our arms, patting ourselves on the back over this cut block. And 3 years later, I went back to do a post-planting assessment of the block, and there was a gas plant and a battery, which were parked right in the middle of the block. So all that effort, all that planning on the forestry side got completely missed when the energy sector showed up. And I'm not wanting to point a finger at the energy sector here. What I'm pointing a finger at is a lack of coordination, a lack of sort of shared planning on that landscape so that we don't trip over each other when we act on that landscape. And unless we have that landscape view, we can't do that. So I'd absolutely second what Dan said about keeping our meta focus at the level of the landscape.
So we got to work together if we want to do this right. It's time. The time is now, and we can do it. So from there, it's to a bit of a hard conversation. We're going to talk about the importance of scientific integrity, the importance of not getting carried away by the narrative you think science is telling you. That although there is beauty in nature and there is lessons to be learned, we can't lose ourselves in that narrative. We must always make sure that the science is pointing us in the right direction, because distortion of science is not good for anything. It's not good for anyone. So this clip was from a very challenging conversation that I had in episode 135 called Reconsidering the Wood Wide Web with Justine Karst. You've all heard of the Wood Wide Web, this idea that mycorrhizal networks exist in the forest and they are benevolently sharing resources, and that there is this interconnection of all the trees in the forest, and there's this kind of an avatar situation. And I think a lot of us were caught up by this idea. Justine Karst came on to help us put on the brakes a little bit. So Justine is a mycorrhizal ecologist, and throughout some of her work, her and a few colleagues did a deep dive into a lot of the research, trying to do a summary, and realized that the entire mycorrhizal ecology scientific research had been based off something that was completely misunderstood, and that the story and the narrative had run away ahead of and in a different direction of the science. And as hard as it was for her and her colleagues to stand out in front of this beautiful narrative of cooperation in the forests, she felt the need to stand up for the integrity of the science and be like, hey, I don't want to devalue the importance of this idea, but the science doesn't actually say that's what's happening. And do we really want a future that isn't based in science? We have to understand the intrinsic value of nature, absolutely, and include it in all of our decisions. But if the science is pointing us in a different direction than the narrative we want to tell, what should we do? So today's clip is all about that. How do we stand up for scientific integrity to make sure that we're not led down the wrong path, and so that we really understand what's going on and we're not misunderstanding the reality of our world?
We love this idea that trees are cooperating with one another through these benevolent fungi. It's just it's so appealing and cozy. And the problem, though, with this situation is if we let the science be distorted in a situation where we like where it goes. So in this case, we like the idea of cooperation. We like the idea of altruism. We like the idea of trees in families and taking care of their babies. We like all those ideas. And so if we're willing to let the science be distorted in that situation, what's going to happen when someone comes along and distorts the science in a way that we don't like where it goes? Say if someone comes along and paints the forest as like, it has no value. Here is my evidence.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And then, I mean, I can guarantee there's going to be a lot of people that would step up and like, no, let me scrutinize your evidence because they don't like where it's going.
Right.
And I would say that's a problem because distortion is distortion. Whether you like where it goes or where you don't like it goes, it needs to be called out. If we don't, then what is the point of my career? What is the point of scientists? Like, it erodes the entire scientific enterprise if we are not calling out bias when we see it.
Yeah.
Whether we like it or not, it is our job to be able to look at that and be like, okay, we need to scrutinize the evidence. Like, what is most important to me, though, is protecting the credibility of the scientific enterprise. And that goes way beyond me, and it's helpful for all scientists. You know, and I can't impose like how I feel on other people, but I guess for me, I'd rather know the truth than believe in a fairy tale when it comes to forests and how they function. That's me, though.
Yeah.
And okay, so for example, COVID misinformation. And there were a lot of situations where people who were totally not experts about COVID were asking questions, you know, sowing seeds of doubt mongering. And the public picks up on this. And now that, you know, many people are afraid of vaccines or whatever. And so it is an antidote to that. We expect that experts in that field are upholding a high bar of scrutiny.
Right.
So that when others like me, I'm not a COVID expert, but if I can trust that field to know that the researchers there, they're holding themselves to a high bar, that whatever is coming out of that field, I can trust.
Right.
And so this idea, you know, when you're a non-expert and you're coming in and like asking all these questions, doubt mongering, most of us don't like that because we're like, you are not an expert in this field.
Right.
Sit down, stay in your lane. I want to hear what the expert has to say.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that means then we're trusting experts in the field
You have to
be calling out, no, that's misinformation. No, that's in dispute. That seems like an extraordinary claim. Can you show us some evidence for that? We are trusting the people in the field to be those people. And so I am one of the people in the field of common mycorrhizal networks and forests.
Yeah.
And so I can't imagine, like, who else should be calling this out then? Like,
yeah.
If it's considered, you know, if someone says, oh, it's like I have an axe to grind or whatever, and I don't even know what to say. It's like, who should be calling this out then? If you don't trust me, like, or if I'm not the right person, an expert in the field that could, with some authority, say, hey, there's some problems there. There's some confounding effects. Then who do you trust to be calling this out? Who do you trust to be upholding our field if you're not trusting the people who actually are researching for the past 20 some years in the field?
Yeah.
And so that part I find very confusing. Like,
at some point you have to trust experts. Like that's, you've spent your lifetime doing this. You're like, and not necessarily trust you personally, but you can trust the science or scrutinize the science at the very least. And like, and
well, you want to know, it's like skeptic has such a like dirty connotation to it now, being a skeptic. Like there's just all these stereotypes and stuff, but it's like science relies on it. And it's very easy to be like singing lullabies to the public about common mycorrhizal networks and forests.
Lullabies.
Like, you know, and here's all the fantastic things they do.
Like.
It feels good. People love it. It makes them care.
Yeah.
But that's not my job. And my job as a scientist is to be critical, to be kind. I don't want to be like, I really try not to be mean and mean-spirited when I am saying, hey, there's some problems, or I don't understand this. This seems inflated. And
you should be able to do that in science. That's what science is for.
Yeah, but it just feels like it's harder and harder to do that.
I really appreciate Justine's courage here, because a lot of the things that have happened to her, she didn't put in this episode. She experienced a lot of personal attacks and harassment because she pointed out how researchers were blind to the misinterpretation of the facts. And she had to be the bad guy in public, talking against this beautiful narrative that everyone understood. But she decided that she had to stand up for the science, because if she didn't, like she said, what was the point of her career? And so she paid a personal price for helping humanity not get lost. And we all owe her a huge round of thanks, because it takes integrity and courage to do the right thing when it's so much easier to just ignore it. Now, this next episode is a continuation a bit of this idea of being rooted in truth. And it is seemingly, at first glance, you might think it is kind of working against Justine's idea of science, but I don't think that's the case at all. I think this is helping to round out this idea. And it is from episode 166, the one that just happened, called Decolonizing Land Stewardship with Dr. Jennifer Grenz. Jennifer is an amazing mind. Jennifer has a background in Western science and academia, but at the same time, she's a proud Nklapawmak woman. I hope I said that right. And her family comes from Lytton First Nation. She is here to help us navigate those two worlds. She wrote this beautiful book called Medicine Wheel for the Planet that I highly recommend. And it really helped me understand where science falls apart, right? So although we need to uphold the idea of Western science, it has holes in it too. The simple idea that human beings can be objective is flawed. So Jennifer helps us explore this idea of understanding where Western science is helpful and where we need to really be tied in back into that intrinsic value, back into that spiritual value, back into that human emotional connection, and helping us to navigate these two worlds at the same time. Her lab, the Indigenous Ecology Lab, really exemplifies this idea. So she uses Western science to help explain Indigenous ecological ideas. So she reaches out to Indigenous communities. They tell her the questions that they have, the ideas that they want to explore, and she helps them navigate that in a Western academic way. And through that, she's been able to explore the intersection of these two ideas. And it is beautiful. So she helps us to understand, how do we have real relationships with land and back up those relationships in our decisions with science.
I think for me, it was just like a series of moments, like where you're finally connect all of the dots of your experience. And I think realizing what made me feel good when I was out in the field, like what was the work that really felt right. And, I started working with land guardians before land guardians were really known as a thing, and in fact, like it was with BC Parks, the work that I was doing. And I think they called them observers at the time, but they became the land guardians. And I just remember at first being, even as an Indigenous person, a little annoyed that there are these people coming out with us that are going to slow us down. Right. Like, what do they know about what we're doing? And then as I was we were going out with them, I learned more out in the field in 10 minutes with them than I had my whole career. And again, there was this tension where it was like, oh, they're wasting our time. They're dragging us down this other trail to show us this cool skeleton of a bear, or to this lake, or, but then in those moments, just learning more about their territory and what they knew, I was like, whoa, I want more of this. How did this get missed in my education? Even just understanding the history of a place. We were managing Japanese knotweed, up the Indian River and like talking about the internment camps that were, the internment camp that was up there, and like, and that maybe that was what introduced this plant because it's a food plant and, used by Japanese people. And like just talking about the history, like I was the kid who loved science. Like I hated history, like social studies was like
same
the worst, right? Like, and then this also just like was like, wait a minute, like this history is relevant to understanding what's going on out there. And then just the being driven by the love of land and place and letting that kind of lead our curiosity. Like I think for me, it was just, I don't care. Like, I don't care about being objective. And I remember like I was reading Braiding Sweetgrass, like in the bathtub when I was doing my PhD, feeling like, holy crap, like someone is speaking what is on my heart every time I'm out in the bush. Like this is a thing. Like all these feelings are legit and it's okay, And I think maybe I was at a bit of an advantage at that point too, where I've established myself in my field, like, so I'm not like someone new that's going
you have a
like,
reputation. Yeah.
Right. Like we should turn this on its head. I'm like, hey, I think we could do this better. And so, so I think for me, like, it was just this, like, I just want to work in a way that's congruent with what's on my heart. And I just really don't care. And maybe this is part of also my radical anti-era. Like, I don't care what other people think anymore. Like, and I think that's also, why my lab is structured the way it is. Like we work entirely in service to Indigenous communities. So they're leading the question. They're, and I'll bring all the scientific tools in. Like I want to get as much data for them because that's an important knowledge translation exercise, right? And but we're gonna use it and analyze it in a different way, or we're gonna ask different questions. But we're along for their ride and supporting whatever it is that they want for outcomes. And again, like I learn all the time. I just came from Quaker First Nation, up the North Coast off Campbell River in Phillips Arm. And like, I've left with 3 days more knowledge than I had when I left. Like, it's just, there's just so much more that we can learn in practices like silence and listening and being open and being okay with feeling what it is that we're taking in.
Yeah, you're right. Because like science tries to remove that feeling, or tries to remove the human element of it entirely. And you're like, well, but like if you're feeling something, that's a hint. There's something going on there. Like maybe you can't put it into words, can't put your finger on the problem, but you know that it's like when you meet a person and like everyone's like, oh, you'll meet this person, you're going to love this person. This person's great. And you meet them and you're like, I'm not good with this person. And they're like, why? I'm like, I don't know. They give me the creeps. I don't like them. Something's off. Yep. They're like, oh, they're so friendly. And they're like, yeah, I don't trust them. I don't know. Like, you can't put your finger on it, but it's there. Right? Yeah. And why not trust that instinct in science as well? Like, we are human. Science is a human endeavor. Why would we remove humanity from it, or try to? It's insane to try.
Well, and also like, tell me one person who isn't in their particular line of work because there was something that motivated them to care about it.
Right. Totally.
Right. Like, like, so we're not objective even in choosing the thing that we're doing.
Yeah. Right.
So like, so let's just be honest, right? Like, why am I in this? I love the land. I love the people of the land. I want to make things better. Like, and I think my science is so much better by being honest about that. Then, and also like now, I mean, like so many elders over time told me like, you got to talk to the plants, you got to listen to the plants. And I never like really understood what that meant. And I feel like just over the last couple of years, especially like I talk to the plants all the time, like, but think of how much more you learn in a conversation rather than reading someone's bio.
Yeah. So yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And that's how it feels to me. Like, why are you here? Like, where did you come from? Like, tell me your story, instead of like reading in Pojar, about this plant. Right.
Yep. I think, no, I totally, I can see where you're coming from. Cause I think
a big moment for me in coming to this was like reading Braiding Sweetgrass and talking about the, like you're saying, the difference between an object and an individual, right? Like you can mistreat an object and it doesn't matter. But if you treat that plant as an individual, as something that is growing, it is living, it is doing stuff, it is interacting with the land, and all of a sudden it's a lot harder to mistreat something that you think of as an individual, which they are, right? And that shifted a lot for me as well, right? Realizing like, oh yeah, no, I was just out here with my ego, tramp around, being like, oh, I'm the master of the forest. I know all the plants. That's a this and this is a that, and they do this, they interact this way, and you're not really appreciating it, not really getting it, not getting the full thing. And I think it's so easy for people to look at like what you're talking to the plants, like, okay. Like,
well, you should see my grad students' faces, right? I mean, I'm sure like they're like, our supervisor's a little special, but then when they can let go of all the inhibitions that come from like how we're kind of socialized to be in science, right? Or like to be logical or whatever it is. Like, I know that they tell me like, I feel way better about what I do working that way. And having a conversation and giving animacy to something doesn't mean that we don't shape it or decide that it's not part of the ecology of a place that we're trying to curate, right? Like you might not make the cut, right? But we're giving consideration to you and what you might offer. And I think that, that is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, is, how we understand place and challenge these concepts of naturalness, or even like what a forest actually is, is really important to like how we do better going forward. As an Indigenous person who, I grew up with my culture more than I realized, but it wasn't like in the forefront, right?
Okay.
And in fact, because I grew up away from our territory, I'm in Clickatmouth, I'm a member of Lytton First Nation. I didn't grow up there. And so I didn't have this foundation in our stories or our knowledges per se, but I was fortunate to have other knowledges shared with me, because I think there was, when you're Indigenous and you live as an urban Indigenous person, you're finding belonging in different places. And so I was so lucky that, so many of my Coast Salish friends have been generous enough to share knowledges with me. And I think that the more now that I'm spending time with my own nation, like I'm on our lands committee now for Lytton First Nation, and learning our stories and learning our axiology and the depth of connection to place, like through our stories, through the people that are there, that is really helping me to understand that even more our relationship to land cannot be objective. And I think how these things though work together is that when you are working alongside people from that place, you are accessing a depth of knowledge. Like it's not just facts. It's more than that. It's very hard to even put it into words, but it's like it brings a ceremony or a reverence to the work that you're doing. And so maybe we have a responsibility in some respects to carry objectivity in the sense that we're trying to do work that honors that depth of relationship, and so I think that to me is how those things can be brought together, is like, then we can make a decision about how we're approaching the work that we're doing. That am I honoring that depth of relationship to place in how I'm doing my science or how I'm answering the question? And then, also, am I bringing in both knowledge systems as well? And I feel like a little bit, like, I don't know if I'm quite explaining myself very well, but I think that's the thing that gets missed, is that the reverence, one of my daughters said to me, like, really our religion is our land. And I was like, well, that's a very simple way of putting it, but yeah, right? Like, you know, our origin stories, like it is, you know, and so I think that also helps us behave with objectivity in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
Like if you walked into a church, you know, like, you know, there are certain ways that you behave in that place, right? Because
yes.
Right. And so then if you're
Respect,
bringing in your objectivity, you know, the things you've learned in Western science, but into a space of that reverence, you're going to use it and wield it differently.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So I don't know.
No, that makes sense. No, it does. It totally makes sense. We're just like, it's respect, right? It's like bringing respect, because like objectivity is this word of like, it comes from caution, right? We're like, we have to be cautious that we're not making assumptions and jumping to conclusions. And that's the purpose of objectivity, right?
Yeah.
That we're not jumping to conclusions and then going off on the wrong path and actually is not true.
I liked where you're going with caution, right? Because objectivity it's coming out of an abundance of caution to ensure that you're trying to get to as close to the truth as you can. But I think in this case, it's like cautious of what?
Yeah.
Like, what is the caution? Like, what's the value? What are the values that are driving the caution that you're bringing in? You know, it might seem like we're getting into semantics here or something like that, but I just find every time I'm working now, I feel like I'm getting the whole picture more and more and more, the more I do spend time thinking about these things. Ultimately, really all it is just coming in with just a helping of humility.
The way I was thinking about it, what you discuss in the book, like the 3 tenets of Indigenous, what did you call it? Did you call it Indigenous research methodology, I think?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And you said respect, relationality, and reciprocity. And when I consider those 3 things, it's almost like thinking about like the 4 Stoic virtues, right? Like it feels the same kind of way. Like how do you live a good life? Like the Stoic virtues are, I forget what they are. It's like wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage, right?
Yep.
And to me, this is the same kind of thing. It's like
but
respect.
what are those built on? I mean, this is the thing too, is that it's not knowledge that builds those things, it's wisdom.
Yes, and that's a big difference.
And where does wisdom come from? Experience. And what does science discount? Experience. Where are we on wisdom? That's what we need. That's what's missing.
That's it, folks. That's all we got. This is the end. So thank you. I think I can summarize Your Forest into a few words. Be humble, be respectful, and be curious. I think we're all going to be okay. So thank you for allowing me to curate this experience for you. It has been one of the honors of my life. And, to be able to talk to so many interesting and passionate people on this show, I just have to say thank you to all of the guests over the years. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. Your knowledge and experience and willingness to share and be open really has made this such a rewarding thing to do and to share with the rest of the world. So thank you to all of you. And to you listeners as well, thank you. Because without you, like I said at the beginning, there is no ripples of impact. There is nothing. It's just me spouting into the void and nothing changes. So thank you to every single one of you that's ever listened. You have made this possible. The last few thank yous that I have to say, first of all, to the sponsors, to West Fraser and to Greenlink Forestry. Without you, this would never have been possible. So thank you for your guidance and help over the years and your willingness to support freedom of ideas, because without you, we couldn't have done this. To so many different people, from GHA Consulting, Malvika Kathpal for helping me with show notes and all of that extra stuff. To Denver Powell for being the sound of Your Forest. He created the music the birds, the transitions, all that from Denver. To Derek Krieger Smith, who was with me for the first few episodes, who gave me the courage to try to do this, to just jump right in. His charisma made it easy. His easygoing nature made it possible for me to start this process. So thank you, Derek Krieger Smith, for all of that. To my number one fans, my parents, always there to tell me what they think. Appreciate you and your support. It's been amazing. And to my wife, first and foremost, for your endless patience and support over the long hours in the pursuit of this passion of mine. Thank you so much. So thank you to everybody that has made this possible. Without you, it couldn't have happened. I'm so grateful for this experience and can't wait to see where I take it next. So finally, in the paraphrased words of one of my fictional heroes, Bilbo Baggins, my dear people, to tell you that I am immensely fond of you all and that 9 years is too short a time to live among such excellent and admirable people. I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. I regret to announce that this is the end. I'm going now. Goodbye.